Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. Wendigos. Are they real? I'm Max, a guy who doesn't buy into all that supernatural jazz. My journey across Canada was a quest for serenity, a break from the chaos of the city. But fate had its own plans. I met Sarah on the road to the nearest town bordering the eerie Canadian forest. She's got this easygoing charm, a natural warmth that makes you feel like you've known her for ages. An artist by passion and an adventurer at heart, she seemed to find magic in every little thing. Our drive was smooth until we decided to take a less-traveled shortcut through the woods. Sarah was brimming with enthusiasm, pointing out every scenic spot and sharing quirky tales about the area. Then, as if the woods were playing a prank on us, my car decided it needed a break. With a splutter and a groan, it called it quits right in the middle of nowhere. Sarah handled the situation with her trademark grace, cracking jokes about forest spirits playing car pranks. Her laughter was a comforting melody amidst the encroaching dusk, especially as the sun dipped, casting strange shadows in the woods. "I guess we're camping here tonight," I said, trying to sound cool, but my mind was racing, recalling those spine-tingling stories about these woods. "Looks like an impromptu forest sleepover," Sarah quipped, her eyes twinkling with adventure. As twilight descended upon us, a mix of apprehension and curiosity settled in. Little did I know, that night in the woods was just the beginning of an extraordinary and unpredictable escapade. As the night wore on, the forest seemed to come alive in ways I couldn't comprehend. Sarah and I sat close, huddled by the dim light cast by the car, our minds grappling with the inexplicable silence that enveloped us. "I've heard tales about these woods," Sarah began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whispers of ancient spirits, wendigos lurking in the shadows, hungry for lost souls." My skepticism battled with a growing sense of unease. "You don't really believe in that stuff, do you?" I questioned, my voice tinged with a hint of disbelief. Sarah's gaze turned distant, as if she was peering into a realm beyond our understanding. "There are things in this world, Max, things that defy logic and reason. Stories passed down through generations often carry fragments of truth," she murmured, her words hanging heavy in the still night air. The forest remained shrouded in an eerie quietude, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the cryptic language of the woods. Then, a chilling sound echoed through the night, a haunting, indescribable howl that seemed to emanate from the heart of the forest. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and uncertainty. "Tell me that's just an animal," I whispered, my voice betraying a trace of dread. But Sarah remained silent, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond our refuge. It was as though the forest itself held its breath, acknowledging the presence of something otherworldly. As the night wore on, sleep eluded us, the air thick with anticipation and an unspoken understanding that we were not alone in these woods. The paranormal tales I once scoffed at now hovered at the edge of my consciousness, leaving me to grapple with the inexplicable and the unknown. The night stretched endlessly, an unyielding embrace of mystery and foreboding. Little did I know, the secrets these woods held were far more profound and unsettling than anything I had ever imagined. Nightfall enveloped us. Every shadow seemed to harbor a secret, and each whisper of the wind fueled the tension that had settled between Sarah and me. We stayed alert, our senses heightened, listening to every crack and rustle in our surroundings. Suddenly, a sound shattered the stillness. A branch snapping. We exchanged concerned glances, our hearts pounding in unison in the darkness. Fears of the unknown hijacked our imaginations. Then, emerging from the shadows, a figure appeared. With cautious steps, it drew nearer to us. The atmosphere became stifling, filled with an expectant silence. As it approached, the moonlight revealed its identity, a dog. Not just any dog. It wore a handmade collar woven with tiny bones, emitting an unsettling yet intriguing aura. That's the dog I saw on the wanted posters in the town," murmured Sarah, her voice a mix of relief and surprise. The canine drew closer, its eyes expressing gratitude and a peculiar kind of camaraderie, as if it knew us somehow. Despite the eerie collar, its gaze conveyed a sense of calmness, as if reassuring us that we were safe. The tension gradually dissipated as the dog settled by our feet, seeking refuge and protection. Though its initial presence had enshrouded us in mysterious suspense, we now felt a sense of relief, realizing that perhaps the only being lurking in these woods was this faithful companion. We stood there, in the stillness of the night, the dog at our side, gazing at the stars as uncertainty gave way to a sense of connection with this creature who, somehow, had found its way to us amidst the darkness. With the dog nestled by our side, a calm settled over us. Sarah and I found ourselves drawn into a conversation that delved beyond the surface, revealing aspects of ourselves we hadn't shared before. "You strike me as someone who loves a good challenge," Sarah remarked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. I chuckled softly. Guilty as charged. I tend to dive headfirst into things, seeking that thrill of the unknown. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I've always been drawn to art, to stories that breathe life into the mundane. They help me see beyond what's visible, finding beauty in the unnoticed." Her words resonated with me, drawing a parallel to my own quest for the extraordinary. "I get that," I replied. "Sometimes, the world's magic lies in the smallest details, the stories waiting to be told." As our conversation meandered through our passions and quirks, the tension of the night seemed to dissipate, replaced by a genuine connection. We shared stories of childhood adventures, dreams we harbored, and fears we kept hidden. "So, what brings you to these parts?" I finally asked, curiosity nudging me to uncover more about her. Sarah smiled softly. "I seek inspiration in the unexplored. There's an energy here, a mystique that whispers tales waiting to be painted." Her words stirred something within me, a longing for a deeper connection with the world around me. "I guess we're not that different," I admitted. I embarked on this journey to find a piece of myself I felt was missing. As the night wore on, our conversation flowed effortlessly, each revelation strengthening the bond between us. With the dog as our silent companion, we found solace in the shared tales of our lives, unveiling layers of our personalities under the starlit sky. The night wrapped us in an eerie calmness. Sarah and I were engrossed in our conversation when the forest fell into an unsettling stillness. I shivered, an inexplicable unease settling in my bones. "You know, when a forest goes silent, it's rarely a good sign," I muttered, an involuntary chill creeping down my spine. It was a truth I'd learned in my wilderness treks. A silence like this hinted at lurking danger. Before Sarah could respond, a deafening, inhuman cry pierced the silence. The dog bolted, its fur bristling as it dashed towards the source of the sound, disappearing into the dense woods. "What in the world was that?" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with alarm. "Maybe an elk or something else," I replied, trying to mask my own unease with rationality. But deep down, I knew that sound didn't belong to any forest creature I'd ever encountered. Instinct kicked in, adrenaline surging through me as we chased after the dog, our footsteps pounding against the forest floor. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole as we ventured deeper into the woods. Each step echoed with an unspoken fear, the rustling leaves and cracking branches around us a haunting symphony. "Where did he go?" Sarah's voice trembled, panic lacing her words. "I don't know, but we need to find him," I urged, my heart racing with a mix of worry and foreboding. As we pushed deeper into the forest's heart, an ominous realization gripped us. Something beyond the ordinary lurked within these woods. We plunged deeper into the darkened woods, our frantic calls for the dog met with a haunting silence. The air hung heavy with tension, every step echoing our growing apprehension. Then, amidst the oppressive silence, a thunderous rhythm of galloping footsteps thundered toward us. Panic surged through me, primal instincts kicking in. "Run!" I shouted to Sarah, the urgency in my voice betraying the fear clawing at my insides. Our feet pounded against the forest floor, a cacophony of terror-fueled steps. The thundering sound seemed to gain on us, getting closer with each passing moment. But in that panicked sprint, I stumbled, my foot catching on a protruding root. I pitched forward, the ground rushing up to meet me. A sickening crack echoed through the woods as my head connected with an unforgiving rock, and darkness enveloped me. The last thing I remember is a flurry of movement, Sarah's voice calling out my name in desperation, and the thundering gallops fading into an ominous silence as everything went black. A faint, distant murmur pulled me from the abyss of unconsciousness. My eyes blinked open to a world draped in shadowy hues. Panic surged as I sat up, the dry crust of blood on my forehead sending shivers down my spine. The forest lay before me, desolate and eerily silent. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the vastness of the woods. No response. No signs of the faithful canine companion either. A feeble light filtered through the dense canopy, casting a muted glow. Had dawn broken? No, it hadn't. I realized with a sinking feeling that I'd been unconscious for almost a day. Hours remained until the onset of another night. Another cycle of darkness. Fumbling to my feet, a disorienting wave of dizziness swept over me. The world spun as I steadied myself against a nearby tree, a pounding headache pulsating in tandem with my racing heart. I frantically searched for any signs of Sarah, any clue about what had transpired in my absence. But the woods held onto their secrets, whispering nothing but an ominous quietude. Gritting my teeth against the fear threatening to overwhelm me, I knew I had to find her, find some semblance of answers before the shroud of night descended once more. The forest stood poised in a liminal state, caught between the fading remnants of the night and the impending darkness. And in this eerie in-between, I stood alone, with the chilling realization that the mysteries of these woods had only just begun to unfold. Staggering through the silent woods, I felt the weight of impending darkness bearing down on me. The hours had slipped away, leaving behind an ominous hush that settled over the trees like a heavy shroud. I stumbled forward, each step an arduous effort as I fought against both physical and emotional exhaustion. Fear and a desperate need to find Sarah surged within me, propelling me deeper into the heart of the woods. Then, amidst the suffocating quietude, a distant echo caught my attention. A soft whimper, almost imperceptible. My heart skipped a beat. Was it the dog? Could it be Sarah? Driven by hope, I followed the sound, branches clawing at me as I pushed through the dense underbrush. The fleeting light dimmed further, a foreboding chill seeping into the air. As I advanced, the faint glimmer of the moon illuminated a figure lying on the forest floor. Relief washed over me as I recognized Sarah's silhouette, curled up beneath the canopy of trees. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice trembling with a mix of worry and relief. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open, but something seemed amiss. "Mux, what happened?" Her voice was weak, tinged with confusion. I knelt beside her, my heart pounding with a whirlwind of emotions. "I don't know. We got separated. I fell and then I woke up alone." A fleeting sense of safety washed over us, finding solace in each other's presence in the heart of this enigmatic forest. Yet, as the last traces of light faded from the sky, the encroaching darkness whispered of untold dangers, reminding us that the night held secrets we were yet to uncover. The chill of the night wrapped around us, a constant reminder of the lurking mysteries in these woods. Sarah and I huddled together, seeking warmth and reassurance amidst the encroaching darkness. But as the night wore on, a persistent unease settled within me, a gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. A sharp pang sliced through my temples, a sudden, intense pain seizing my senses. I winced, gripping my head, trying to ward off the crippling ache. It felt as though my skull was splitting apart, a relentless assault on my senses. I collapsed to the forest floor, the pain overwhelming any coherent thought. Darkness encroached at the edges of my vision, threatening to pull me under. With a desperate gasp, I fought against the encroaching unconsciousness. When I finally awoke, it was to a world cloaked in the eerie glow of midnight. Confusion clouded my mind as I tried to piece together the events. But as awareness flooded back, a stark realization struck me with chilling clarity. I wasn't with Sarah. Instead, the loyal canine companion lay beside me, its gentle eyes peering at me with a mix of concern and familiarity. Panic surged through me as I struggled to comprehend the twisted reality. My mind had played a cruel trick, conjuring a false narrative amidst the chaos of the head injury. I had mistaken the dog for Sarah in my delirium. Frantic and disoriented, I called out for Sarah, the echoes of my voice swallowed by the silent expanse of the woods. But there was no response, no trace of her amidst the shadows that stretched across the forest floor. Reality crashed down upon me like a relentless wave. The impact had not only disoriented me physically, but had shattered the fragile illusion of safety and companionship in this desolate place. I was alone, lost in a realm of uncertainty and unforeseen dangers. Gathering my scattered thoughts, I tried to retrace my steps, to make sense of the fragmented memories and the ominous events that had unfolded. The dog stayed by my side, a silent companion offering solace in the midst of confusion. With a heavy heart, I embarked on a solitary journey through the haunting woods, each step a reminder of the tangled web of mysteries that awaited me. The night whispered secrets I was yet to decipher, and the shadows concealed truths that eluded my grasp. As the moon cast its silvery glow upon the landscape, I pressed forward, driven by a relentless determination to unravel the enigma that had entangled me in this surreal and treacherous journey. The clearing in the forest appeared suspended in a perpetual state of desolation. Life had withered away, leaving behind a landscape of wilted vegetation and an eerie silence. My steps echoed in the emptiness, breaking the ominous quietness that enveloped the place. Small scattered skeletons, and the complete absence of any animal life, painted a disconcerting picture, one that evoked a deep sense of fear within me. My gaze fixated on the cave that stood in the distance, a dark opening that seemed to be the epicenter of this desolation. A cold, damp draft escaped its mouth, like a mysterious whisper calling me toward its interior. My mind grappled between curiosity and the instinctual warning that this place wasn't safe. What secrets or dangers lay hidden within that cavernous darkness? My heart pounded, uncertainty clouding my thoughts. The dog, my silent companion in this surreal journey, remained by my side, its eyes filled with loyalty and an uncanny animal wisdom. Its presence seemed to offer a sliver of courage amidst the darkness. The mystery shrouding the cave was palpable, an enigmatic invitation tempting my curiosity and challenging my prudence. Was it wise to venture into the jaws of the unknown? I couldn't ignore the sense of danger that clung to my intuition. Time hung suspended in a moment of hesitation, my mind weighing the possibilities while my instincts urged caution. Night was looming, its shadows slowly encroaching upon the clearing, a subtle warning that time was running short. Then, a decision solidified within me, fueled by the need for answers and the will to confront whatever awaited in the darkness. With cautious steps, I approached the cave's entrance, every fiber of my being alert to any hint of danger. The dog emitted a soft growl, its gaze fixed on the cave's mouth, as if trying to warn me of something invisible to my eyes. Its gesture reignited my unease, but an indomitable impulse pushed me forward. With a deep breath, I crossed the threshold of the cave, plunging into the darkness that devoured the light. The air grew denser, laden with an earthy and mysterious aroma, as if it were imbued with centuries of secrets held within the earth's depths. The echo of my footsteps reverberated against the rocky walls, my hands feeling the cold contours of the cave, searching for any clue that might guide me. The darkness was overwhelming, but a glimmer of determination burned within me, propelling me forward in search of answers. Each step was a challenge, an internal struggle between the desire to uncover the truth and the terror of the unknown. The cave seemed like an endless maze, its secrets hidden in the shadows, waiting to be unraveled or forever guarded by the veil of mystery. The dog remained by my side, its comforting presence amidst the dimness. Its animal senses seemed alert, its eyes scanning the surroundings as if anticipating some hidden danger in the darkness. A distant whisper echoed in the cavern, a barely perceptible murmur that enveloped my senses with a sense of unease. Was the cave witness to an ancient secret, or was it the dwelling place of something more sinister? Time blurred in the darkness, each minute feeling like an eternity as I ventured deeper into the cavern's depths. More and more, the sense of intrigue mingled with the palpable fear that stirred in the rarefied air. Amidst the blackness, a revelation materialized. The challenge of the cave lay not only in its nooks and passageways, but in the enigmas and dangers that lurked, concealed within, challenging my courage and sanity. As I ventured deeper into the cavern, shadows danced ominously on the walls, amplifying the eerie silence that enveloped the space. The air grew heavier, thick with an unidentifiable scent that sent shivers down my spine. Then, in the dimness, shapes began to emerge. Bodies strewn across the cave floor, a macabre sight that froze the blood in my veins. My heart sank at the grim reality of death that surrounded me. Amidst the lifeless forms, a sense of dread gripped me as I noticed Sarah lying unconscious but miraculously alive among the corpses. With urgency coursing through my veins, I hurried toward her, intent on rescuing her from this haunting place. But as I approached, the dog, sensing something amiss, grew restless, its bark piercing the oppressive silence of the cave. Before I could reach Sarah, a bone-chilling presence filled the cavern, an entity that defied the laws of nature and reason. The Wendigo, towering over 2 meters tall, its form contorted and unsettling, staggered into the cave, its very presence a manifestation of primal terror. I retreated, seeking cover among the lifeless bodies and foliage, my breath hitching in fear. The Wendigo's ominous aura seemed to suffocate the air, its looming figure casting a malevolent shadow over the scene. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror, hidden from view, as the monstrous entity approached the dog, its movements predatory and menacing. The poor creature's barks turned to whimpers, a futile attempt at warding off the inevitable. With a single, brutal strike, the Wendigo ended the dog's life, a sight that pierced through my soul like a dagger. I clenched my teeth to stifle a cry, a wave of helplessness washing over me as the creature began to feed on the life it had just extinguished. Terror rooted me to the spot, my body trembling as I bore witness to the gruesome spectacle unfolding before my eyes. The Wendigo's insatiable hunger was a harrowing sight, its savagery a stark reminder of the unfathomable horrors lurking within these accursed woods. I prayed for some semblance of escape from this waking nightmare, but the darkness of the cave held me captive, a silent witness to the unspeakable brutality of this unearthly being. The plan had formed in my mind, even amidst the horror unfolding before me. With determination, I approached Sarah, assessing her delicate condition. Her injured leg was a concern, and her unconscious state added a layer of difficulty to our imminent escape. The creature, oblivious to my presence, had retreated from the cave after its grisly meal. I knew I had to act swiftly before it returned in search of more prey. Carefully, I lifted Sarah into my arms, her body light but fragile. Concern for her well-being mingled with the urgency to flee that accursed place. Every step was a challenge, each movement calculated to avoid causing further harm to Sarah's injured leg. The weight of responsibility clung to my shoulders. Time was not on our side. The mouth of the cave loomed before me, the hope of escaping that inferno beginning to take shape. But every rustle in the forest, every shadow shifting in the darkness, fueled my fear of being discovered by that monstrous being lurking in the shadows. With each step, the urgency grew. The exit was in sight when a shiver ran down my spine, a foreboding sense warning me that the Wendigo was nearing. The sound of crunching branches and a menacing hiss echoed behind me. There was no time to waste. With a superhuman effort, I quickened my pace, dodging the danger and entering the relative safety of the forest. My ragged breaths and the weight of Sarah in my arms combined with the anxiety of escaping that living nightmare. Each inhale, each beat of my heart, was a reminder of the struggle for survival. I ran as fast as I could, seeking refuge and protection for Sarah and myself. The forest seemed conspiratorial, every noise, every shadow, igniting the fear that was engulfing me. Finally, I found a secure hiding spot, far from the cave and beyond the Wendigo's reach. I carefully placed Sarah in a safe location, watching over her with concern while attempting to keep at bay the panic threatening to engulf me. My mind raced, weighing options, seeking a way to get help or find an escape from that torment. But for now, the priority was to ensure we were out of that creature's reach, find assistance, and a path to salvation. Unfortunately, what I've told you isn't my story. While Max and Sarah did exist, well, they existed. I'm just a search and rescue guy tasked with finding these people. As part of the search and rescue team, our priority was locating two missing individuals, Max and Sarah. Their disappearance had us on edge, and our efforts to find them led us deep into an undisclosed and secluded area. Amidst the dense forest, we stumbled upon a discovery that sent shivers down our spines: a weathered notebook. Its contents held a gripping tale, a first-hand account of harrowing encounters with an unknown creature. The details were vivid, the emotions raw, and every entry felt like a real-life experience. As I read through the pages, the story transitioned into a warning. It seemed to convey the inherent danger of the events described, urging extreme caution for anyone daring to venture into that area. The descriptions of the creature were so vivid and haunting that they felt eerily tangible. The authenticity of the notebook's account struck a chord within the team. We couldn't dismiss it as mere fiction. The descriptions were too detailed, too genuine to ignore. The warning it carried felt like a genuine caution against something inexplicable. Our search for Max and Sarah yielded no results, leaving us with more questions than answers. The notebook remained a cryptic piece of the puzzle, hinting at a reality too unfathomable for conventional explanation. As a seasoned member of the search and rescue team, it was a stark reminder of the unforeseen dangers lurking in unexplored territories. We handled the notebook with caution, treating its contents as a solemn warning, a testament to the potential perils of the unknown. And yes, we found that cave, but no one was inside. Just rests of that dog and some strange wood sticks figures with some hair, and somehow it was DNA compatible with those people. Don't try to find that place. Second story. A camping trip with a terrifying, unexpected visitor. So, this isn't a story about me, but a story one of my good friends told me when describing his recent camping trip with another of our friends. And I'll start by saying, I believe every word he says, because of the fear I saw in his eyes when he told me about this series of events, and because of something that was said to me by my father that I'll get to at the end of this telling. Davis is the one telling me this story, and he's with Keenan. Edit. It was brought to my attention by a reader that the way I have this story worded is a bit confusing, as far as deciphering who is speaking. I was advised that maybe instead of telling the story in my point of view, with Davis telling me the story, that I should tell it as if Davis was the one talking to you readers. So, what you will be reading from here on out will be in the perspective of Davis. My entries with my father will still follow at the end of the story. So, we live the very beautiful Washington state. Mountains, woods, camping galore. Well, Keenan and I decide to take advantage of a couple days off in the middle of the week that we both shared during the summer. So we go out to an area in the national forest about a few hours from where we live, somewhere around Susan Creek. We decide on a small campsite in the area to camp, set up, and on goes our night. Now, we were camping on a Wednesday night, so we were the only ones in the campsite. Something we thought was nice at first, but would later realize wasn't nice at all. Everything was normal: campfire, shared stories, a couple beers amongst friends, and so on. It's getting late, so we jump in the tent and go to bed for the night. And it begins. I wake up in the middle of the night to Keenan having night terrors. He's shouting and flailing and whatnot. I turn on my flashlight and wake him up and tell him he's just having a bad dream, attempting to calm him down. Keenan gets up and regains his cool and tells me he dreamt that someone or something was in the tent with us, and it wasn't right. Nothing about it was. I tell him again, it was just a dream. Relax and get some sleep, and turn off my flashlight. Well, a couple minutes later, I see Keenan's silhouette still standing there in the tent, and getting a bit frustrated, I say, "Keenan, it was nothing. Lay down and get to sleep." I then feel Keenan bump me on my arm and say, "I'm laying right here. What are you talking about?" I was still looking at the silhouette as Keenan muttered those words. I didn't say anything. I just froze. Felt ice in my bones, and felt the most genuine sense of fear I've ever felt. and I stared at it for what felt like ages. Eventually, I just assumed my eyes were playing tricks until Keenan whispered, "Davis, do you see that thing standing in our tent?" At this point, I came unglued, completely freaked, screaming, flailing, you name it. Then it reared up. It was very tall, given the space in our tent. Skinny arms, extremely long fingers, probably 8 inches long, inverted legs like a flamingo, and pure black. It reared up, turned around and ripped out of our tent, and off it went crashing into the night. At that point, we had never ran faster in our lives. Left everything and ran straight for the car, and off we went. Now, a couple weeks had passed, and I get a phone call in the middle of the night from Keenan. And Keenan is hysterical. He tells me that he was at a friend's house for a while, and he went back to his car to leave. Well, his friend has quite a long driveway, and Keenan found parking maybe in 1/8 mile up the driveway. Friend lives in a very rural area around here. Well, Keenan's car was having difficulty starting. He'd turn the key, starter would engage, lights would come on, but the engine wouldn't turn over. He did this a number of times, and in his effort noticed a cat in the middle of the drive looking at him, illuminated by the headlights turning on and off. Well, finally, Keenan's car fired up, but where the cat was sitting was now that creature, standing broadside and staring at him. But only for a second, because at that moment, it took of running and jumped a massive creek, and off into the woods it ran. Keenan immediately called me, while tearing out of there like a bat out of hell. And that's the last we heard or saw of this thing. What you just read was in the perspective of Davis. How he told me this story, almost word for word, now is where it gets weird for me. I'm fascinated by this story, almost jealous I wasn't there to witness it. I'm sitting in my parents' living room, and I start telling them this story because I know they would be intrigued. About the time I got the part of the creature tearing out of their tent, my father interrupts and says, "Where were they, Susan?" Mind you, I never knew where they went camping. Davis had left that part out. Whether intentionally or not, I don't know. I told my dad I wasn't sure, but I was curious, so I sent Davis a message asking where they were at while camping. His reply still sends shivers down my spine. It was simple, "Susan Creek, why?" I didn't reply. I just looked at my dad and said, "How did you know that?" He told me that my cousin Josh had gone out there camping around hunting season, and something happened to him out there. He said my cousin couldn't explain it, and wouldn't even try explaining, but that he refused to ever go back, refusing to go anywhere near the area for that matter. That bit there sealed it for me. I was convinced they were telling the truth. I don't know what it was. I don't know what happened there. Susan is a Native American name for sure. Maybe it's related? Or not? Have any of you seen something like it, or heard of a story similar? I'd love to know. Third story. Not sure if it was a Wendigo, but something odd happened. When I was 8 years old, both of my parents worked full-time. My dad was predominantly on third shift at his job, and my mom was an elementary school teacher. We lived literally right up the road from my grandparents in a very small town. It was getting close to my 9th birthday when I contracted strep throat and scarlet fever. I was severely sick, could barely speak, had the first case of cold sweats that I remember in my life, and could barely pull myself out of bed to even use the restroom. I was absolutely miserable, and of course, being as young as I was, I didn't take the pain very well. My poor mother was at a loss of what to do with her working and my dad needing to use daylight hours to sleep. The first day I was sick, perhaps it was a Tuesday, my birthday would fall on a Friday. My dad stayed up most of the day with me, made me food, let me sleep in his lap on the couch, wiped my forehead down, made sure I took my medicine, etc. But on the second day, my grandmother had called and offered to let me stay at her house so my dad could sleep. He said yes and woke me up around 7 that morning to drive me up to her home. My grandfather also worked at this time too, so he was already gone to work when I arrived there. I don't remember too much of the early morning. I probably just slept in my grandmother's bed, tossing and turning when I'd wake up feeling extra bad. She encouraged me to swallow my awful tasting medicine, a little more gently than my dad did. She did fix me some tomato soup to try and eat, and it was the first time since I'd gotten sick that I had an appetite. I should mention my grandmother had this cute Yorkshire Terrier named Samson. He was very docile, not like the usual annoying, barking all the time terriers. Samson came into the room and curled up next to me as I dozed. I do know when I woke up at some point, It had to be the early afternoon/lunchtime because I could hear the TV faintly from the living room on some game show. My grandmother had a ritual of eating her lunch while watching a game show. I think it was The Price is Right. I was trying to fall back asleep because I had gotten this really bad headache, maybe from dehydration. I was on the verge of sleep when I was jolted awake by this Samson yelp that erupted from the living room. The terrier curled up next to my feet perked up, but didn't move. I knew I had heard his name being called too, but it was odd he didn't respond. Samson. My grandmother called again. Samson. Samson. The dog still didn't run out of the room to her. I was confused, as he was so obedient to my grandmother. He was almost frozen, staring at the cracked open door, but making no attempt to go to her. She called, Samson, maybe 3 or 4 more times. Then I got annoyed. I remember flinging the covers off of me. Of course my clothes are sticky with sweat, and I just generally feel uncomfortable and groggy. I stumble out of the room wiping my eyes, asking Grandma, do you need Samson? He's in your room with me. I'm in the living room, and I have to do a double take. The TV is still on and blaring. There's a bowl of soup sitting on the coffee table and an open Pepsi next to it, but my grandmother isn't anywhere in the room. Maybe she's in the bathroom? I crossed the room and went past the kitchen, empty too. I got to the bathroom door, which was shut, and knocked. Nothing. I then opened it. No one was in there. The house is empty. It's not a huge house either. I've covered all of the rooms. So yes, my first reaction was to get scared. I could clearly hear my grandmother calling for the dog, but she's not anywhere inside. I can feel my hands and feet get all tingly. I start shouting for my grandma, but my voice is just echoing through the small, cramped home. Samson had gotten up at this point and was sitting near the couch, looking completely undisturbed. I fumbled for the remote and turned the TV off and yelled, more like wheezed, to the top of my lungs, which you can imagine how painful this was with a scratchy, infected throat. Grandma! The worst part happened next. I heard her shouting my name back, clear as ever, like she was standing only feet away. I start crying now, scared out of my mind. I feel like maybe it has to be a ghost. I grew up with scary ghost stories courtesy of my dad, and I'm convinced now I'm in the room with a ghost. And then she/whatever this was, proceeded to call my name again. Then, there was a second voice, definitely not my grandmother's. It was deeper, definitely more masculine, and absolutely terrifying as it shouted, "Come to the front door." I did not do that. Instead, I made sure to run back to my grandparents' bedroom, lock the door, and pick up the telephone on their nightstand. I called my own home phone, and my dad's sleepy voice answered. Through a barely comprehensible voice, I managed to croak something like, "Daddy, there's someone in the house, and I can't find Grandma. She's gone." My dad, of course, said he jumped out of bed, grabbed his Swiss Army knife he kept in a drawer next to the bed, and ran down the road to the house in his PJs and bare feet. He ran up to the front door, jiggled the handle. It was locked. So he made his way around, and since he knew the garage code, just punched it in and got inside. A quick sweep of the 3 rooms of the home showed no one was in there. It's not like there was really anywhere to hide. I ran out of the room once I was sure he was there, and began bawling in his arms. He kept reassuring me there was no one here, and then asked if I did know where Grandma possibly was. I said I hadn't, and explained I'd woken up to her calling for Samson, but she hadn't been anywhere there. This was back when cell phones were definitely around, but there were no iPhones, and my grandparents certainly wouldn't have been buying them anyway. My dad had one, but not on him at the time. I could tell he was trying to keep calm, so he just said we would need to go back to our house. I was sure he was probably going to call the police at that point, just because my grandma still hadn't popped up and her car had been in the garage when he got in. If she'd left, she'd gone on foot. We hadn't even made 2 steps out of the driveway when from my grandma's neighbor's house, my grandma was strolling out, chatting to the neighbor. She saw my dad and then me, crying my eyes out, and immediately ran over to see what was wrong. She was super apologetic. She said she'd stepped out right when she'd heated up her soup to go see her neighbor, who'd called about looking at something my grandma was going to buy. My grandma had figured I was asleep, and she'd only be gone for 10 or 15 minutes. At first, people may have assumed I was feverish, therefore delusional, but I still stand by what happened. I know for a fact I was definitely alone in the house, save for Samson, but the voices I heard were real. For a while, I was hesitant to go back to my grandma's house, because this happened in the middle of the day. I later read stories at school about Wendigos, or creatures that would disguise their voices to lure people. This was the closest explanation I could ever form about what I heard. I never shared to anyone that I thought it was for sure a Wendigo, and chalked it up to maybe just a ghost. I'm close to my 20s now. Last year was the first time I shared this story fully to my grandpa, who used to just say the fever must have made me had bad dreams. We were sitting on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes and exchanging anecdotes. When I finished telling him, for the first time he looked sort of disturbed about it. He finally put his cigarette out and just stared out into the road. Then he cleared his throat and looked over at me. "You know," he said slowly, "some funny things used to happen around that time. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up to take a piss or something. When I'd first sit up in the bed, I could hear your grandma sleeping away, snoring." He chuckled, but his face grew serious again. "Anyways, I'd always hear her calling for the dog." I tried to remain looking calm, but my voice still shook when I asked him, "Even when she was sleeping? Sleep talking?" "No," he shook his head. "I heard her calling from outside, maybe the living room. I dunno, honey. She'd call for the dog. She'd call my name. All while she was really sleeping next to me, sleeping like a baby." "Have you ever told anyone?" "No, I don't want to scare her. She's real scared of ideas like ghosts and stuff. That's why when you were younger and that thing happened, I told her just to remember you'd been sick, fever and all, probably having nightmares." He looked gravely at me. "Don't repeat this to her, please, honey. She's really not the type to be scaring." Of course, I wanted to cry. I had this itchy, creepy feeling suddenly about being at the house. "Grandpa, do you still hear it sometimes?" "Oh yes." He was now reaching into his breast pocket to get out another cigarette. "Every night, but you just gotta remember not to do what it says. Even the dog figured it out. If it says to come to the door, you stay away from the door. If it says, I dunno, come here, you just stay still in the room until it quits calling." With that, he asked to borrow my lighter again. Fourth story. I think my mom was cursed by a Wendigo. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed to myself, making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mom, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain and forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 feet high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence. Beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting first grade, and what I'm about to tell of has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mom was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think they knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mom stayed back at the house to do paperwork for an ongoing custody battle. When she was alone, or when I was out of sight, was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard. Yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened, she wrote it off as her hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another, especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends out on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest and the valley. She would invite them over when I was at school still, so that she can focus of relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mom, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mom supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home, or find my mom if I was off inside the house, my mom would keep asking me if I was really at school today, and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mom had of an encounter with an unwelcomed friend on / around our property was one night in 2014. When I was in 4th grade, a magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county, and she was literally shaken awake. Note: the bedroom we were sleeping in had the bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up, but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully, we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handyman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset, to keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat chickens, along with a metal fenced, not the chicken wire kind but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, coop on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions, since a few were recently spotted north the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. At first it was just one chicken that ended up drowned at the bottom of our pool. After that we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then one late morning I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mom, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, look at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open, and inside the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chicken are eaten or missing. Their heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbors or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remember most was not the dismembered chickens, but the smell of rotting flesh, even though the chicken looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back, it felt like we were being taunted by this thing. Or at least my mom was for some reason. When we still lived at that house, and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mom got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer, and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by the Wendigo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion as she was low risk in getting breast cancer, let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house, of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if these reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She had hoped it was something good and not malevolent. In fact, it did have my voice after all. Last year in the fires, the house burnt down, and this year in the spring, my mom passed away. Looking back, it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing, or maybe there was no supernatural explanation, but it still lingers in the back of my mind. Fifth story. Something is stalking around the Santan Mountains. First, let me start by providing some backstory to the area. My name is Devin, and I have lived in Arizona for a total of only about 2 years, and in that time, I have found myself enamored by the myths and legends surrounding the area. Arizona is no stranger to the mysterious, and I often found myself passing the nights away reading stories of the Navajo skinwalkers, the Mogollon monster, El Chupacabra, and even some accounts of La Llorona. Me and my group of buddies loved Arizona, and often found ourselves taking week-long camping trips up to Snowflake, Payson, or Heber. Throughout all of those trips, we had never seen or experienced anything too out of the ordinary. The only notable occurrence we had ever encountered were some strange noises that could be heard at night around the campsites, but that was usually chalked up to nerves from being so far away from the city or a prank pulled by one of the other guys. We would regularly gather around the fire and tell stories of the various cryptids and legends around the area, looking to creep each other out as we had a drink in order to add a sense of excitement to our usual trips. We had never expected to witness any strange events ourselves. This trip, the outing where it all happened, started just like the rest. Just 4 months ago, one September morning, our little ragtag group of 6, Luke, Bobby, John, Derek, Jack, and myself worked to gather the necessary supplies for our next adventure. Luke and Bobby were in charge of general supplies, gathering tents, flashlights, and the like. They grabbed 3 two-person tents, a few lanterns to set around the area as well as some handheld flashlights, some extra supplies that we would need to start a fire and cook food, and loaded the truck bed with some extra wood pallets to break down for the fire. John was on food duty and arranged a plethora of canned and freeze-dried food, water bottles, and the most important camping staple, supplies for s'mores. We had put Derek and Jack on a beer run and packed up a few cases of Coors, pack of Corona, some seltzers, and even a small Dos Equis keg that one of them had grabbed because it looked cool. While everyone else was gathering supplies, I made arrangements and got any permits we would need. This time, we were heading to the Santan Mountain Regional Park, which stood only about 8 miles away from where we lived, which was a small trip compared to our usual outings. The area was just south of the town of Queen Creek, where most of us lived, and a ways east from the Indian Reservation. The park was a very popular camping spot and was usually booked out for most of the year and was quite hard to get an official reservation. Instead of going the traditional route, we decided it would be best to delve further into the territory than the set-up camping grounds, as we wouldn't have to deal with other campers and could party through the night without disturbing others. That afternoon, we loaded up the truck to carry all of our supplies and piled in to be on our way. We each brought with us a rifle as it would be our method of defense. We did not bring them expecting to have to use them, but it had just become a common practice to be prepared for the worst. So they usually just sat in the truck nearby or in the tents bagged up. After our trucks were loaded up, we drove the relatively short distance to the grounds and delved deep into the territory until we found a suitable spot. The entire park was covered in brush, cacti, and rocky cliffs, which was a change from the usual forests we camped out in. We decided on a spot that was bordered by some small rock formations and had already been somewhat cleared of large brush. When we stepped out of the trucks, it was obvious that the spot had been used before, as there sat a circle of rocks that was obviously for a fire, and the site was littered with abandoned camping supplies. There was trash and empty beer bottles strewn about, and even a tent that lied flat on the ground. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the tent was torn to shreds and covered with what looked like large marks made by claws. We thought that this was strange, but just chalked it up to a wild animal nesting in it at one point, or some crazy campers riding a high and freaking out. Who would just leave all of this out here? I said, bewildered at the lack of consideration from the previous campers. Some people, Derek said back generally, shaking his head side to side. We grabbed some bags from the truck and proceeded to clean up the site a bit before we began to set up our tents, a process that only took about an hour. Around this time, the sun had begun to set, so we began breaking down a pallet and setting up a fire. That night was uneventful and was just a small diner of canned stews and a few beers afterward before we settled down to bed. Our 3 tents were split between John and Derek, Luke and Jack, and finally Bobby and myself. We were already pretty tired from our earlier preparations and found ourselves dozing off pretty quickly. Sometime in the early morning, it couldn't have been earlier than 3 a.m. I suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. I sat up in my sleeping bag and looked around to see Bobby passed out to my right. I was still groggy, but I could just barely hear the sound of footsteps from nearby my tent over Bobby's snores. I would usually just pass it off as someone getting up to take a piss, but something about the sound of the steps unsettled me. There was no rhythm or reason to them like a normal human's footsteps would. It was like something large was limping or just learning how to walk. That is when I noticed the smell. It smelled like a mixture of rotting meat and mildew, like what wet clothes smell like when they have sat in a pile for a few days. It was overpowering. I could barely even think. My eyes began to water, and I think I even gagged a few times. I unzipped my tent and stepped outside quickly to throw up. I emptied the contents of my stomach on the rocks a couple of feet away from the tent and proceeded to dry heave for the next minute or two. The smell had gotten worse when I exited the tent, and as I sat there, trying to pass this feeling of dread that had begun to build up in the pit of my stomach, I felt as if I was being watched from somewhere behind me. I whipped around frantically and looked past the other two tents, fumbling for my little battery-powered flashlight in my pocket, quickly clicking it on and pointing in the direction I felt I was being watched from, and saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. I shined the light left and right, scanning the open clearing and the nearby cliffs, and just as quickly as it had come, the horrendous stench which had plagued the campsite quickly subsided. I clicked my flashlight back off and sat down on a big rock next to my tent and tried for the next few minutes to slow my breathing and calm my nerves. After what must have been 30 minutes, I had calmed down just a little and crawled back into my tent and finally dozed off again. That morning, I proceeded to tell the group what I had experienced that night and was quickly met with laughter by the others. "It's unusual to see you so freaked out by nothing, Devin," Jack said to me jokingly. "If you get scared at night, Devin, you can crawl into my tent and cuddle with me," Derek said with a grin. "Very funny," I said back. "Are you sure you didn't have too much to drink last night?" Bobby, my tent mate, asked as he finally crawled out from the tent, putting his hands in the air in a stretch and letting out a yawn. I thought about it. Could that smell and feeling really have been a fallacy created by my drunk mind? It had felt so real, and there is no way I could mistake that smell. Even now, hours later, I still felt my stomach rumble when I thought of it. Not to mention the footsteps. "I don't know," I finally said, trying to move on. The day went by without any occurrence, and I forgot about the events of last night and just tried to have fun. That night, we all sat around the campfire again, drinking a beer and telling scary stories, just a normal night. Sometime later, John was telling a story and Derek stood up to walk away. "Where are you going?" I called out to him. "I just gotta piss," he called back as he faded into the darkness of the night. John continued telling his story, and about 5 minutes into it, we heard the yelling and running footsteps of Derek as he basically tumbled into one of the tents. We leapt to our feet and quickly asked him what was wrong. Running over to where he had fallen, he pointed a finger back to where he had just came from and began to babble nonsense, and that's when I noticed he was shaking uncontrollably. Luke knelt down next to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Calm down, buddy. Tell me what you saw," he said soothingly, trying to get him to calm down. "There's something out there," Derek cried. "It looked like some kind of person or something, but it was fucked up, and it smelt so fucking bad." We proceeded to look around at each other. Derek was usually the most level-headed out of all of us, widely considered as the mother of the group, and he rarely ever drank or got drunk. So we took it seriously when he told us what he saw, but we had not entirely pieced it together yet. "What could it be?" Luke said to the group. "I'm not sure. Maybe some kind of wild animal?" John said back. "I think we should pull out the guns, just to be safe." I said, "Good idea." Luke agreed. We honestly should have realized then that it was time to leave, but we were stubborn. We thought that we were invincible, that nothing could happen to us, that anything strange could be explained rationally. Sure, we like to tell stories of mysterious creatures and occurrences, but those were just that, stories, right? We each pulled out our hunting rifles and sat back around the fire once again, trying to stay calm in light of what just happened. That's when we started to hear the sounds. It sounded like screaming, all around us. It sounded like it was coming from one source, but it was coming from multiple places and directions, like whatever was making the noise was traveling around us impossibly fast. John pointed out that it sounded like Derek's scream. I realized that he was right. It sounded exactly like how Derek had yelled earlier when he ran back to camp, like his scream had been recorded and was played over a speaker over and over again. It sounded artificial, like an animal was trying to mimic a human scream. That's when I noticed the smell. That ungodly stench had returned, and this time, everyone else could smell it. We were all standing up at this point, backs pointed towards the fire, aiming our rifles out into the darkness, trying our best to cover our noses to block out that mind-numbing stench. Then suddenly, the sounds just stopped, and the smell subsided. We had a hard time falling asleep that night, yet despite what we had just experienced, We weren't quite ready to leave yet. To this day, they'll never know why we didn't just leave. Later in the night, I was once again awoken suddenly, only to realize that smell had returned. At this point I was done. I was tired of being afraid of whatever was out here in the wilderness, just outside of my home. I grabbed my rifle that was sitting next to my sleeping bag, quietly unzipped the tent, and poked my head out to see what was outside. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Standing upright, just past the dying embers of the campfire, hunched over the one of the tents, was an abomination of which I had no name for. It was tall, at least 7 feet tall, and was covered head to toe in sickly pale skin that seemed to almost reflect in the moonlight. In different spots, its body seemed to be almost rotting, with different patches of flesh hanging loosely off of its body and limbs. As I took a closer look at it, I noticed its gangly arms held down by its sides were different lengths. One arm was longer than the other, and not just slightly, but by a few inches. Its arms were skinny and bony, seemed impossible long, and had joints turning in all the wrong areas. At the end of its hands it had what looked to be long finger-like claws. I was not able to get a good look at its face yet as it was turned away from me, standing over one of the tents across from me. I felt this rising sense of indescribable dread as I watched it. I thought of all the possibilities in my head, thinking back to the torn-up tent that we had noticed when we first arrived. I imagined that at any moment, this creature could rip through the tent and my friends with its claws before they could even react. With a burst of adrenaline, I opened my tent the rest of the way slowly, walk quietly outside, and aim my rifle at the head of this creature. Just before I am about to shoot this thing, I hear Bobby's fearful yell behind me. "What the fuck is that?" he yells. The creature in front of me whips around at an impossible speed. That's when I saw its face for the first time. It had deep hollow sockets where its eyes were, and its eyes glowed a menacing yellow. Its mouth stood agape with a fear-inducing set of jagged, sharp teeth, and it let out a mind-numbing screech that sounded like a mix of a high-pitched screech and low growl. I tried to shoot it, but I either missed, or the bullet did no damage to it, as it pounced on top of me, knocking me down, and dug its claws into the sides or my torso. I screamed in pain, feeling the creature's claws digging into my flesh, looking into the eyes of this thing on top of me, smelling its rancid breath, almost causing me to pass out. At this point, everyone else had already woken up, and the other 5 men jumped out of their tents in a flurry, aiming their rifles at this thing and unloaded into it, trying their best not to hit me in the process. The barrage of gunfire must have at least injured it because it recoiled in some kind of pain and got off me, releasing me from its clawed death grip and stumbled a few yards away. In that moment, Derek and Luke grabbed me as John, Jack, and Bobby reloaded and continued to fire in the direction it stumbled off into. I winced with pain as Derek and Luke lift me up. That dreadful screech fills our ears once again as we book it to the trucks. We pile in quickly, leaving behind all of our tents and supplies, and start to speed away. This thing must have been chasing us, because that scream seemed to follow us. "How is it this fast? We're going like 80 miles an hour," said Bobby in the driver's seat as he pressed the pedal to the floor, trying his best to maneuver the pitch-black landscape to get back to the trails. I don't know," Derek was stammering as he began to put pressure on the deep wounds on my side as I groaned in pain. The road was bumpy, and it felt like we were being pushed and pulled in different directions as we drove. The sound of the creature's shrieks and creaking metal filled our ears. Eventually, we couldn't hear the sounds of the creature anymore, but we never once slowed down, speeding past the checkpoint to enter the park and speeding off the lit town streets. I must have passed out along the way because the next thing I remember is waking up 2 days later in a hospital bed. Apparently, after I was stable, my friends went to the police and the park rangers, telling them what we had experienced. They left out some of the more unbelievable details but recounted details of the creature, the sound it made, and the smell. The authorities seemed skeptical at first but were more inclined to believe that something was out there after seeing the state that I was in and seeing the damage done to the trucks. What I had not yet seen or noticed was that the trucks were covered in large, deep claw marks on the sides, and the back bumper was torn off. That's when I realized that we had just barely escaped with our lives. What was this thing? How could it be fast enough to chase a high-speed truck? How could it have the strength to rip through a metal frame like paper? Why didn't bullets seem to hurt it? I was filled with so many questions that I did not particularly want the answers to. When I was finally released from the hospital and reunited with my friends, we never spoke about the events that happened on that trip. I don't even know why I am typing this out. Maybe just to get it off my chest so I can finally move on, but I must warn everyone reading this. Be careful when camping deep in the Santan Mountains. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.